Hello, and welcome to Tuesday Tales of Terror. I am your host for the evening, Collie Mortwood. Oh man, I am just looking worse and worse. We've all got things that we're going through. Anyway, welcome. I wish I could start this over, but we're already here. So, we are reading Clive Barker's The Thief of Always. And we are in part 5. And we are starting chapter 13, the 4th part of Darkness. Prop myself up. I'm happy Yule, by the way. I'm wearing this really adorable like little elf shirt, and it has a belt and a candy cane, and it has striped sleeves, which are really cute, but you can't see them because it's cold and I'm bundling up. And then I changed into sweatpants. Like, my outfit starts off cute, and then as the day goes on I just gradually fall apart. So the 4th part of Darkness has this goblin, gargoyle type creature. Okay, we're here. "What happened to you?" Wendell whispered when Harvey reached the bottom of the lawn. "I thought we were meeting at midnight." "I got waylaid," Harvey said. He'd intended to tell Wendell what had just transpired, but his friend was obviously nervous enough without being told about Lulu's fate. Oh, that's right. Harvey slipped the 3 survivors of the Ark into his pocket and resolved only to speak of the encounter when he and Wendell were safely away from this terrible place. Just one thing stood between them and that ambition: the wall of mist. Now as ever it seemed innocent enough, but that was an illusion, of course, like so many things in Mr. Hood's kingdom. "We have to be very organized about this," Harvey said to Wendell. "Once we're in the wall, we lose our sense of direction, so we have to be sure we keep walking in a straight line, and not let the mist turn us around." "Well, how do we do that?" said Wendell. "I think one of us should go in first, and the other keep hold of his hand." "Me," said Wendell eagerly. "I want to be first." "No problem. Then I'll keep my back to the house and keep guiding you. Who knows? Maybe the wall's so thin you'll just be able to pull me through." "We can hope," Wendell said. "Are you ready?" Harvey asked, extending his hand. Wendell took it. "Whenever you are," he said. "Then let's get out of here." Wendell nodded and stepped into the mist. Instantly, Harvey felt his grip tighten. "Don't let go," Wendell said, his voice already remote, although he was just a pace away. "Just keep walking," Harvey said as they reached arm's length. "Any sign of—" Before he could finish his question, a noise from the house behind him sealed his lips. He glanced back. The front door was open, and a light was burning in the hall, throwing into silhouette the figure rushing down the porch steps. It was Mrs. Griffin. The noise he'd heard was not from her lips, however. Nothing human could make such a din. He saw Mrs. Griffin glance up toward the roof as she hurried down the lawn, and following her gaze saw the noisemaker rising against the stars. He knew its name, even though he couldn't see its face. Hood had 4 servants, and he'd met only 3. Rictus, Jive, and Mar. Here was the 4th, Karna, the tooth stealer. Karna, the devourer. Karna, the beast. Mrs. Griffin had hoped Harvey would never meet. "Back to the house, child," Mrs. Griffin yelled. The din of the vast wings filled the air. "Quickly! Quickly!" Harvey pulled on Wendell's arm, yelling to him as he did so, but Wendell had a whiff of freedom in his nostrils and wasn't about to give it up. What are you waiting for?" Mrs. Griffin yelled. "Get away from there, or it'll take off your head. Harvey glanced up at the swooping beast and knew this was no lie. Karna's jaws were wide enough to snap him in half with a single bite, but he couldn't leave Wendell in the mist. They'd begun this adventure together, and that was how they would finish it, dead or alive. He had no choice but to step into the mist himself, and hope that Wendell had snatched a glimpse of the world outside and could pull him through to the street. As he took that step, he heard Mrs. Griffin say something about leading the way. Then he was blinded by the chill of the mist, and the sound of her voice became a garbled whisper. Karna's shrieks were not so hushed, however. They pierced the murk, skewering Harvey's thoughts the way its teeth would skewer his head if the beast caught up with them. "Wendell!" Harvey yelled. "It's coming for us!" He caught a glimpse of a figure up ahead of him, then of Wendell's face smeared by the mist, turning to stay. "There's no way out!" "There has to be." "I can't find it," Wendell said, his reply almost drowned out by the din of Karna's shrieks. Harvey glanced back the way he'd come, more afraid not to know how close the creature was than to see it, however terrifying the sight. A veil of mist swirled in front of him, but he glimpsed Karna's form as the beast descended. It was the most monstrous of the brood. Its skin rotted and stretched over barbed and polished bone, its throat a nest of snaky tongues, its jaws set with hundreds of teeth. This is the end, Harvey thought. I've only been alive 10 years, 5 months, and I'm going to have my head bitten off. Then from the corner of his eye a strange sight. Mrs. Griffin's arms reaching into the mist and dropping Blue Cat to the ground. "He's got a good sense of direction," Harvey heard her say. "Follow him! Follow him!" He didn't need a second invitation, nor did Blue Cat. Tail up, it padded off, and Harvey hauled on Wendell's arm to drag him in pursuit. The cat was quick, but so was Harvey. He kept his eyes glued on that bright tail, even when the rush of wings behind him announced that Karna had entered the mist and was almost upon them. 2 strides, 3 strides, 4, and now the mist seemed to be thinning. He heard Wendell whooping for joy. "The street!" he yelled. "I see it!" And the next moment Harvey saw it too. The sidewalks wet with rain and shining in the lamplight. Now he dared look back, and there was Karna, its jaws a yard from them. He let go of Wendell's arm and pushed his friend toward the street, ducking as he did so. Karna's lower jaw scraped his spine, but the beast was moving too fast to check itself, and instead of wheeling around to scoop up its quarry, it flew on, out into the real world. Wendell was already there. Harvey joined him a moment later. "We did it!" Wendell yelled. "We did it!" "So did Karna," Harvey said, pointing up at the beast as it rose against the cloudy sky and turned to come back for them. "It wants to drive us back inside," Harvey said. "I'm not going!" Wendell cried. "Never! I'm never going in there again!" Karna heard his defiance, its blazing eyes fixed on him, and it came down like a thunderbolt, its shriek echoing through the midnight streets. "Run!" Harvey said, but Karna's stare had rooted Wendell to the spot. Harvey grabbed hold of him and was about to make a run for it when he heard the beast's cry change. Triumph became doubt, doubt became pain, and suddenly Karna wasn't swooping but falling, holes opening in its wings as though a horde of invisible moths was eating at their fabric. It labored to climb the air again, but its wounded wings refused their duty, and seconds later it struck the street so hard it bit off a dozen of its tongues and scattered 100 teeth at the boy's feet. The fall didn't kill it, however. Though agonized by its wounds, it hauled itself up onto the spiky crutches of its wings and began to drag itself back toward the wall. Even now, in this wretched state, it was ferocious, and with snaps to right and left drove Harvey and Wendell out of its path. "It can't survive out here," Wendell realized aloud. "It's dying." Harvey wished he had some weapon to keep the beast from returning to safety, but he had to be content with the sight of its defeat. If it had not wanted their flesh so badly, he thought it wouldn't have come after them at such speed and brought this pain and humiliation upon itself. There was a lesson there, if he could only remember it. Evil, however powerful it seemed, could be undone by its own appetite. Then the creature was gone. a curtain of mist drawn over its retreat. There was only one sign remaining of the mysteries that lay on the other side of the wall, the face of Blue Cat gazing out at the world that he, like all the occupants of the holiday house, could never explore. His azure gaze met Harvey's for a moment, then he looked back toward his prison, as though he heard Mrs. Griffin's summons, and with a sorrowful sigh turned and traipsed away. "Weird," said Wendell as he stared at the rainy streets. "It's as though I never left." "Is it?" said Harvey. He wasn't so sure. He felt different, marked by this adventure. "I wonder if we'll even remember when we came here in a week's time." Oh, that was Wendell. "Oh, I'll remember," Harvey said. "I've got a few souvenirs." He dug into his pocket in search of the figures from the ark. Even as he pulled them out, he felt them crumbling as the real world took its toll on them. "Illusions," he murmured, as they turned to dust and ran away between his fingers. "Who cares?" said Wendell. "It's time to go home, and that's no illusion." All right, and we are getting into chapter 14. Time was. And here we have this distraught-looking older gentleman opening the door and peeping out betwixt the door and the frame. It took the boys an hour to reach the center of town, and there, given that their house lay in opposite directions, they parted company. They exchanged addresses before they did so, promising to contact each other in a day or two so that they could support each other's account. Each support the other's account of the holiday house. It would be difficult to make people believe all that had happened to them, but perhaps they'd have a better chance if two voices told the same tale. "I know what you did back there," Wendell said just before they parted. "You saved my life." "You would have done the same thing for me," Harvey said. Wendell looked doubtful. "I might have wanted to," he said, somewhat abashed, "but I've never been very brave." "We escaped together," Harvey said. "Couldn't have done it without you." "Really? Really? Slugger?" Wendell brightened at this. "Yeah," he said, "I guess that's right. Well, be seeing ya." And with that, they went their separate ways. It was still several hours before daybreak, and the streets were virtually deserted, so for Harvey it was a long, lonely trudge home. He was tired and a little saddened by his farewell to Wendell, but the thought of the welcome he'd get when he reached his own doorstep put a spring in his heels. Several times he'd wondered if he'd gone astray, because the streets he passed through were unfamiliar. One neighborhood was extremely fancy, the houses and the cars parked outside them slicker than anything he'd set eyes on. Another was virtually a wasteland, the houses half rubble, the streets strewn with garbage, but his sense of direction served him well. As the east began to pale, and the birds in the trees started their twitterings, he rounded the corner of his street. His weary legs broke into a joyful dash and brought him to the step, panting for breath and ready to fall into his parents' arms. He knocked on the door. There was no sound from the house at first, which didn't surprise him given the hour. He knocked again and again. Finally, a light was turned on, and he heard somebody coming to the door. "Who is it?" his father said from behind the closed door. "Do you know what time it is?" "It's me," said Harvey. Then came the sound of bolts being drawn aside, and the door was opened a crack. "Who's me?" said the man, peering out at him. He looked kindly enough, Harvey thought, but it wasn't his father. This was a much older man, his hair almost white, his face thin. He had a badly trimmed mustache and a furrow of a frown. "What do you want?" he said. Before Harvey could reply, a woman's voice said, "Come away from the door." He couldn't see the second speaker yet, but he caught a glimpse of the wallpaper in the hallway and the pictures on the wall. To his relief, he saw that this was not his house at all. He'd obviously made a simple mistake and knocked on the wrong door. "I'm sorry," he said, backing away. "I didn't mean to wake you up." "Who are you looking for?" the man wanted to know, opening the door a little wider now. "Are you one of the Smith kids?" He started to dig in the pocket of his dressing gown and brought out a pair of spectacles. "He can't even see me properly," Harvey thought. Poor old man. But before the spectacles reached the bridge of the man's nose, his wife appeared behind him, and Harvey's legs almost folded up beneath him at the sight of her. She was old, this woman, her hair almost as colorless as her husband's, and her face even more lined and sorrowful. But Harvey knew that face better than any on earth. It was the first face he'd ever loved. It was his mother. "Mom?" he murmured. The woman stopped and stared out through the open door at the boy standing on the step, her eyes filling up with tears. She could barely breathe the words she said next. "Harvey." "Mom. Mom, it's you, isn't it?" By now the man had put on his spectacles and peered through them with his eyes wide. "It's not possible," he said flatly. "This can't be Harvey." "It's him," said his wife. "It's our Harvey. He's come home." The man shook his head. "After all these years," he said, "he'd be a man by now. He'd be a grown man. This is just a boy. It's him, I tell you." "No," the man replied, angry now. "It's some prank. Somebody trying to break our hearts, as if they're not broken enough." He started to slam the door, but Harvey's mom caught hold of it. "Look at him," she said. "Look at his clothes. That's what he was wearing the night he left us." "How do you know? You think I don't remember? It's 31 years ago," said Harvey's father, still staring at the boy on the step. This can't be." He faltered as slow recognition spread over his face. "Oh, my Lord," he said, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. It is him, isn't it?" "I told you," his wife replied. "Are you some kind of ghost?" he asked Harvey. "Oh, for goodness sake," Harvey's mom said. "He's no ghost." She slipped past her husband and out onto the step. "I don't know how it's possible, and I don't care," she said, opening her arms to Harvey. "All I know is our little boy has come home to us." Harvey couldn't speak. There were too many tears in his throat, and in his nose, and in his eyes. All he could do was stumble into his mother's arms. It was wonderful to feel her hands stroke his hair, and her fingers wipe his cheeks. "Oh, Harvey! Harvey! Oh, Harvey," she sobbed. "We thought we'd never see you again." She kissed him over and over. "We thought you'd gone forever." "How is this possible?" his father still wanted to know. "I kept praying," his mother said. Harvey had another answer, though he didn't voice it. The moment he'd set eyes on his mother, so changed, so sorrowful, it was instantly clear what a terrible trick Hood's house had played upon them all. For every day he'd spent there, a year had gone by in the real world. Every morning, while he played in the spring warmth, months had passed. In the afternoon, while he'd lazed in the summer sun, the same. And those haunted twilights, which had seemed so brief, had been another span of months, as had the Christmas nights full of snow and presents. They'd all slipped by so easily, and though he had only aged a month, his mom and dad had lived a sadness for 31 years, thinking that their little boy had gone forever. Here's this flag that says 1 Feb. That had almost been the case. If he'd remained in the House of Illusions, distracted by its petty pleasures. A whole lifetime would have gone by here in the real world, and his soul would have become Hood's property. He would have joined the fish circling in the lake, and circling and circling. He shuddered at the thought. "You're cold, sweetie," his mother said. "Let's get you inside." He sniffed hard and cleared his tears with the back of his hand. "I'm so tired," he said. "I'll make a bed for you straight away." "No, I want to tell you what happened before I go to sleep," Harvey replied. "It's a long story, 31 years long." Chapter 15. What is this? New Nightmares. Ugh, okay. It's this drawing. How much time do we have? 9 more minutes. It's this drawing of this, like, is it Luna? Lulu? Is that her name? Lulu? New Nightmares. Dun, 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 dun. It was a more difficult tale to tell than he expected it to be, though some of the details were clear in his head. Rictus's first appearance, the sinking of the Ark, his and Wendell's escape. There was much else he could not properly remember. It was as though the mist he'd strode through had seeped into his head, and had there drawn a veil over the house, and much of what it contained. "I remember speaking to you on the phone 2 or 3 times, he said. "You didn't speak to us, honey," his mom replied. "Then that was just another trick," Harvey said. "I should have known." "But who was playing all those tricks?" his father demanded. "If this house exists, I say if, then whoever owns it kidnapped you and somehow kept you from growing up. Maybe he froze you." "No," said Harvey. "It was warm there, except when the snow came down, of course." "There has to be some sane explanation." "There is," said Harvey. "It was magic." His father shook his head. "That's a child's answer. And I'm not a child anymore, Harvey." "And I know what I know," said Harvey firmly. "It isn't very much, honey," his mom said. "I wish I could remember more." She put a comforting arm around his shoulder. "Never mind," she said. "We'll talk about it when you've had a rest." "Could you find this house again?" his father asked him. "Yes," Harvey replied, though his skin ran with chills at the thought of going back. "I think so." "Then that's what we'll do." "I don't want him going back to that place," his mother said. "We have to know it exists before we can report it to the police. You understand that, don't you, son?" Harvey nodded. "It sounds like something I made up. I know, but it's not. I swear it's not." "Come on, sweetie," his mother said. "I'm afraid your room's changed a bit, but it's still comfortable. I kept it just as you left it for years and years, hoping you'd find your way home. Then I realized if you ever did come back, you'd be a grown man, and you wouldn't want it decorated with rocket ships and parrots, so we had the decorators in. It's completely different now." "I don't mind," Harvey said. "It's home, and that's all I care about." In the early afternoon, as he slept in his old room, it rained. A hard March rain that beat against the window and slapped on the sill. The sound woke him. He sat up in bed with the hairs at his nape pricking and knew that he'd been dreaming of Lulu. Poor, lost Lulu, dragging her misshapen body through the bushes, her flipper hand clutching the Ark animals she dredged up from the mud. The thought of her unhappiness was unbearable. How could he ever hope to live in the world to which he'd returned, knowing that she remained Hood's prisoner? "I'll find you," he murmured to himself. "I will, I swear." Then he lay back on the cold pillow and listened to the sound of rain until sleep crept over him. Exhausted by his travels and traumas, he didn't wake again until the following morning. The rain had cleared. It was time to lay plans. I bought a map of the whole of Millsap, his father said, unfolding his purchase and spreading it over the kitchen table. There's our house. He had already marked the place with a cross. Now, do you remember any of the street names around Hood's place? Harvey shook his head. I was too busy escaping, he said. Were there any particular buildings you saw? It was dark and rainy, so we just have to trust to luck. We'll find it, Harvey said, even if it takes all week. Okay. It was easier said than done. More than 3 decades had passed since he'd first made his way through the town with Rictus, and countless things had changed. There were new plazas and new slums, new cars on the streets and new aircraft overhead. So many distractions, all keeping Harvey from the trail. I don't know which way is which, he admitted, after they'd been searching for half a day. Nothing's the way I remember it. We'll keep going, his father said, till it'll all become clear. It didn't. They spent the rest of the day wandering around, hoping that some sight would trigger a memory, but it was a frustrating business. Every now and then in some square or street, Harvey would say, Maybe this is it, and they'd head off in one direction or another, only to find that the trail grew cold a few blocks on. That evening his father quizzed him again. If you could only remember what the house looked like, he said, I could describe it to people. It was big, I remember that, and old. I'm sure it was very old. Could you draw it? I could try. He did just that, and though he wasn't much of an artist, his hands seemed to remember more than his brain had, because after a half hour he had drawn the house in considerable detail. His father was pleased. We'll take this with us tomorrow, he said. Maybe somebody will recognize it. But the second day was just as frustrating as the first. Oh, here is the photo of the house. And it's beautiful. It's basically a dream Victorian house. But the second day was just as frustrating as the first. Nobody knew the house that Harvey had drawn, or anything remotely like it. By the end of the afternoon, Harvey's father was getting short-tempered. It's useless, he said. I must have asked 500 people, and not one of them, not one, even vaguely recognized the place. It's not surprising, said Harvey. I don't think anyone who saw the house, besides me and Wendell, ever escaped before. We could just repeat all this to the police, his mother. We could just repeat all this to the police, his mother said, and let them deal with it. And what do we tell them? His father said, raising his voice. That we think there's a house out there that hides in a mist and steals children with magic? It's ridiculous. Calm down, Harvey's mother said. We'll talk about this after we've eaten. They trudged home, ate, and discussed the whole problem again, but without finding any solutions, Mr. Hood had laid his traps carefully over the years, protecting himself from the laws of the real world. Safe behind the mist of his illusion, he'd most likely already found 2 new and unwitting prisoners to replace Harvey and Wendell. It seemed his evil would go on, undiscovered and unpunished. The following day, Harvey's father made an announcement. This search is getting us nowhere, he said. We're going to give it up. Are you going to the police? His wife asked him. Yes, and they'll want Harvey to tell them everything he knows. It's going to be difficult, son. They won't believe me, Harvey said. That's why I'm going to talk to them first, his father said. I'll find someone who will listen. He left soon after breakfast with a worried expression on his face. This is all my fault, Harvey said to his mom. We lost all that time together just because I was bored. Don't blame yourself, she said. We're all tempted to do things we regret once in a while. Sometimes we choose badly and make mistakes. I just wish I knew how to unmake it, Harvey replied. His mother went out shopping in the middle of the morning and left Harvey haunted by that thought. Was there some way to undo the damage that had been done, to take back the stolen years and live them here, with people who loved him, and whom he loved dearly in return? He was sitting at his bedroom window, trying to puzzle the problem out, when he saw a forlorn figure at the street corner. He threw open the window and yelled down to him, Wendell! Wendell, over here! Then he raced downstairs. By the time he opened the door, his friend was on the step, his face red and wet with tears and sweat. "What happened?" he said. "Everything's changed." His words were punctuated by hiccups. "My dad divorced my mom, and my mom is so old, Harvey, and fat as a house." He wiped his running nose with the back of his hand and sniffed hard. "It wasn't supposed to be this way," he said. "Was it?" Harvey did his best to explain how the house had deceived them, but Wendell was in no mood for theory. He just wanted the nightmare to be over. "I want things the way they were," he wailed. "My dad's gone to the police," Harvey said. "He's going to tell them everything." "I won't do any good," Wendell said despairingly. "They'll never find the house." "You're right," Harvey said. "I went to look for it with my mom and dad, but it was no use. It's hiding." "Well, it's bound to hide from them, stupid," Wendell said. "It doesn't want grown-ups." "You're right," Harvey said. "It wants children. And I bet it wants you, me, more than ever." "How'd you reckon that?" "It almost had us. It almost ate us alive." "So you think it's got a taste for us?" "I'm sure of it." Wendell stared at his feet for a moment. "You think we should go back, don't you?" "I don't think any of those grown-ups, my dad, your mom, the police, are ever going to find the house. If we went all those years back, we've got to get them for ourselves." "I don't much like the idea," Wendell confessed. "Neither do I," he said, thinking as he spoke that he'd have to leave a note for his mom and dad so that they wouldn't think his return had been a dream. "We have to go," Wendell said. "We don't have any choice." "So when do we start?" "Now," said Harvey grimly. "We've lost too much time already." And here's a picture of a house in a tree, and I'm guessing that it's the tree house that they were building. That concludes chapter 15. And it also concludes our Tuesday Tales of Terror. Beautiful creatures. I hope that you have a lovely evening. Happy Yule, my darlings. And whatever holiday you choose to celebrate. Or if you choose not to celebrate, then you still have made a choice. Anyway, I love you, and season's greetings to you all. Stay spooky. Stay weird. Bye. I'm never doing that again. Bye.